Our agenda today is one item, and the topic today is the carbon neutral goal for city operations. We have a presentation, and we will be taking public comment during this meeting. And it's my understanding that Mr. Armstrong would like to open the talk today. Jim.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Horton and members of the committee. I'm sorry for being a little late, and I'm still catching my breath from power walking from City Hall. As you know, last June, the City Council heard a presentation on the idea of the city becoming carbon neutral by 2020. And at that time, the Council, kind of an unusual referred this to two different committees, one the Sustainability Committee and also to the Finance Committee, with kind of a dual approach. That the Sustainability Committee would look at the strategy and is this a reasonable strategy, and also at the finances a little, but then that the Finance Committee would look at how financially feasible it would be to become carbon neutral by 2020. At the same time, we and I gave Jim Dewey the instruction to, don't hire a consultant. Do as best as you can working with our finance department on an initial strategy, so we could give you kind of the range of magnitudes to primarily use the strategy that the Community Environmental Council and Tam Hunt had put together, rather than looking at a different strategy. And so what he did is he looked at their strategy and pretty much then tried to put a price tags on it. I think Jim has done a fantastic job of looking at this, and probably went beyond my expectations in terms of the amount of time he's put into this. But again, I think it's important to remember this is still very preliminary, and as Jim will point out, there's a lot of constraints here, or assumptions. For example, that the certain state laws may be amended in terms of our ability to wield power. We're not sure, quite honestly, on some of the financing strategies if they're legal at this point, especially selling bonds to build facilities out of the area and then sell that power. But in terms of kind of the first cut, we're going on what Tam had put together and not trying to change that. The other thing is this is very complicated, extremely complicated, and I know for some of you, you're just starting to see this, and so I don't want you to feel the pressure that you need to make a decision today on what your recommendation will be to the council, because it is complicated. I know I've gone over these spreadsheets with Jim on several times, and he sent me the backup Excel spreadsheets, which are even worse than the spreadsheet you have in front of you. And so I encourage you to take your time on this, because some cities will set goals for themselves and then just file them away. And one of our problems is we set goals for ourselves and then we try and meet them, and we try and hold people accountable. And so if the council does go forward with this goal, that would be our intention, to try and meet it. And we want to take it very, very seriously, because this is really an important issue. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jim.
We have a question first, Jim.
I just have a quick question on something that you said, caught my ear. You said that you have a question with regard to the legality of building facilities out of jurisdiction, maintaining them, and then selling the power back. And I notice here, just in a cursory review, that there are a number of line items here that have to do with selling bonds for a variety of reasons. Could you just for a second expand a little bit on that? Because we own things out of jurisdiction. We own the airport. We own, a number of Coast Village Road. No, we own a whole host of things. So I'm kind of wondering where's your.
Actually, the airport is in jurisdiction. It's in the city limits.
Oh well, if you really want to go there, that's fine.
But one of the strategies here is that we not only offset our direct emissions or try and replace our power sources with green power, but there's also the assumption there are certain things that we do, for example, run fire trucks, heat buildings, that we will always have a carbon footprint. And so the only way to offset that is to then someplace else generate more power than we use, and then sell that power to someone else in order to offset our emissions within the city limits. And so the assumption is, and the plan is that we would build facilities probably where there's good wind power, and then right now we wouldn't be able to wield that power to ourselves, so we'd sell that power to someone else, but we would take credit for the offset of emissions.
All right, so these facilities are based on the basic premise that it's a credit system.
That's
Because
correct.
the carbon neutrality will never achieve a zero. Well, I don't want to say never. Those are absolutes that I don't use very often. But it's likely that in the near future it will be zero might be achieved through a credit back.
And that's what the CEC's
And I know
proposal
that
was.
that's what, I mean,
Yeah.
that's what the Globe is doing, basically, selling credits. It's not the most optimal thing, but okay. All right, thanks.
Okay, Jim, are you going to run us through this thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, to begin with an overview, Council directed staff to develop this preliminary carbon reduction plan and provide some rough cost estimates. So this preliminary carbon reduction report will provide options and costs for greenhouse gas mitigation so that Council can make more informed decisions about the next steps. So to answer the question, what is carbon neutrality? In essence, it's removing as much carbon dioxide and its equivalents as we generate through the city's daily activities. And so that would include the greenhouse gas of carbon dioxide itself that has a global warming potential of 1, and then other gases like methane, hydrofluorocarbons, and nitrous oxide. Methane has a global warming potential of 25 over a 100-year period, so it's much more intense as far as a global warming component. Some of the methods that we're looking at to achieve carbon neutrality are energy conservation and efficiency to reduce the amount of carbon that we emit, renewable generation, switching from standard generation, which is mostly derived from carbon sources, and then the rest of what we cannot reduce or switch to new renewable generation we would offset through renewable energy credits. So giving you a brief timeline, this all started back in November 2007 when the City Council received a recommendation from the Community Environmental Council recommending carbon neutrality goal by 2020. So staff worked with the Council Sustainability Committee on different options between December 2007 and March 2008, and then we visited Council and made a presentation there, and Council from there directed us to prepare this preliminary plan to present to both the Council Sustainability Committee and the Finance Committee. During September 2008 and February 5th, 2009, staff worked on various draft components of this report and presented them to the Council Sustainability Committee, and I'm here to present this to you today. These are some of our carbon neutral by 2020 projects. Beginning with energy efficiency, we have a number of projects through the years 2008 and 2017 that include lighting retrofits, lighting efficiency retrofits, mechanical equipment upgrades, boiler efficiency retrofits, and the addition of electronic controls to our buildings. We also have fleet and fuel reductions that will roll out between 2012 and 2020. That includes moving from B20 biodiesel to B50 beginning in 2012, and also introduces hybrid plug-ins to our fleet and the conversion of gas to CNG and to ethanol.
Just a question on that. Is it in your assumptions that whatever we do is consistent with manufacturers' warranties on vehicles? I'm assuming that's the case, but I just want to verify it.
We're assuming that for all of the, the switching of the fleet. So far, we would need to verify that for especially the diesel-operated equipment.
Yeah, I keep up on this stuff, and I haven't heard that they've accepted B50 yet generally, but that maybe you're enough out in the future that that's possible.
Yeah, it is possible, and it is true that right now B50 is not accepted. B10 and B20 is accepted. That's where we are right now, so that would be another hurdle to overcome. Also, the storage of biofuels is another issue for underground fuel tanks.
Jim,
Question?
just clarification, a couple of them. You have under biogas, new food scrap and brown grease, CT 2014, new fuel cell. I get that we want to put in a new fuel cell. I guess it's out at Tahiguas, but the CT by 2014, are you assuming that we'll have a conversion technology machine, beast eating things out at Tahiguas by then? Is that an assumption that you're working on?
Yes, it is, and I'm going to go into this in a lot more detail. So this is a summary. So I'll
Well, no, I'm intimately familiar with the whole CT conversation.
Sure.
But the next one is PPA with CT operator. What is PPA?
power purchase agreement.
Thank you.
Other projects would include photovoltaic projects. We plan on delivering 1.5 megawatts of renewable energy to the city through photovoltaic solar energy between this year and 2013, according to the plan. Also, hydroelectric power, a 750 kW plant at Cater Water Treatment just needs to be recommissioned. That could be done in 2012. Biogas has already been brought up. Again, this is a conversion through an anaerobic digestion process of food scraps and brown grease that can be used for electricity production between 2014 and 2017. Solar thermal projects converting the sun's power to hot water at the Los Baños Del Mar pool and the waterfront bathrooms. Then there's the Tahiguas conversion technology plant. We'll go into more detail on that a little bit later. That'll occur in 2015. And then last of all, to make up all of the remaining difference that we have in our carbon emissions, we would create offsets by participating in a wind generation venture in 2019. So some of the assumptions in order to make this particular model work, we would have to have the opportunity to receive power from the Tahiguas landfill waste conversion facility. So we would need to receive a significant amount of power from that facility in the form of a power purchase agreement. So that would be 13.4 megawatt hours per year. We would need the ability to use municipal bonds to fund either a public or a public-private commercial wind generation venture. We would also need the ability to sell 2 large bond issues to support our renewable generation measures. One of them would be primarily for the Water Operations Fund in 2015 of $11 million, and the other one would be for the General Fund in 2018 of $13 million. Other assumptions is the additional funding required from now until 2013 for unbudgeted capital and operations. So these are things that we would need to, money that right now is not planned or budgeted that would need to be allocated to this program. So that would be $7 million and 2009 dollars over the period to 2020 in the general fund, and $12 million in the enterprise funds.
Question there, Jim.
You said 2013. I believe you meant 2030, which is up on the board.
Correct.
Okay, just to be clear, because this question came up at the Sustainability Committee, that $7 million is over the course between now and 2030. It's not, and you're going to go over details about where that money's coming
That
from.
is
And same
correct.
with the $12 million.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
According to this model, savings from the carbon neutral 2020 from now between now and 2030 would have a net present value of $3.3 million at a 5% discount rate. Also, one of the other assumptions is that the debt service on the bonds, these would be 20-year bonds at 5% interest rate. The first energy bond issued in 2015 would have a debt service of $900,000 per year, and the second bond in 2018 would have a debt service of $1 million per year. So in wrapping up the assumptions, this particular model provides a rough estimate, as Mr. Armstrong was saying, of the strategies, costs, and the financing needed to achieve carbon neutrality by 2020. So the model assumes that direct access or access to the deregulated electricity market and community choice aggregation, which is another way to obtain purchased energy, are not options at this point. This model is not a complete feasibility study. The model provides an analysis of the theoretical economics based on the city's potential greenhouse gas reduction measures. So the full fiscal impact of carbon neutrality on the general fund, on the enterprise fund, is not fully captured in this model. In other words, it doesn't fully capture things like bonding capacity and what the total impact of all of these measures are going to be on all the different funds. This chart shows how we will reduce our carbon emissions from 12,200 metric tons in 2020 to zero, essentially. This can be done by conversion technology, primarily from the Tahigas project, and that would represent 36% of the total. Then we would have wind offsets representing 29% of the total. Energy efficiency would represent about 9%, hydroelectric 8%, photovoltaic 6%, the fleet measures 5%, and solar thermal 2%.
Question here.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Falcone.
Well, it's me.
Oh.
Can you give me an idea of where you came up with these numbers? Because none of these facilities exist. We're not quite sure where to cite them, except that we know CT is going to go to Tahigas when we get with the county and actually make that happen. But how did you come up with these percentages and slices of the pie?
I started off with what I knew that
I mean,
we
aside
could,
from throwing darts,
I started off with what I knew that we could do, starting off with energy efficiency and conservation. And so I looked at our different facilities and opportunities there and started the model based on that. The first thing I actually did was constructed a business as usual baseline. And
Okay.
once I established that, then I started with energy conservation and started making reductions on energy conservation. And then I went to local renewable generation like photovoltaic systems and the Cater water treatment, and made assumptions about opportunities for those, and then made further reductions. Mm-hmm. And then as I started working through the process, I worked with Gary Horwald, our fleet manager, and we came up with a number of opportunities for the fleet. So I took his numbers and integrated those. Then I looked for other opportunities of large renewable projects, and the most promising ones seemed to be the Tahigas waste conversion project. And so I included that because, I needed to assume something, because there was no other large renewable generation that was readily available in this area.
I guess my point is, and it's just for information, it's not a criticism, it's just, to be fair about what's really going on, is that we are working on educated guesses. Educated assumptions. I mean, they're not completely, these numbers aren't completely made up out of whole cloth, but there is a lot of flexibility in these numbers going forward in terms of what actually hits the ground, where, how. I mean, if we can't figure out a place to site wind, if Lompoc won't take it, then we have to be a little bit real about the fact that these are educated guesses, if you will. The other thing is the conversion technology. It depends on what kind of beast we put on the ground, because different technology. I mean, I'm even chair of the solid waste thing. I mean, a trash queen here for 7 years, but the type of beast that gets put on the ground will generate different levels of energy. So if we go with one type of conversion technology, it may not yield the kind of number that you're looking for, but it might be best for our waste stream. Conversely, if we do go with a high yield energy producing technology, then we have to make adjustments in how we do our, not just recycling, but what we take to Tehiquis and how we go ahead and feed the beast, basically. So just to be clear, because this is a big deal here, and there are so many moving parts to this piece of the puzzle. I just wanted to get your information as to how you came up with these numbers, and then just be realistic about the fact that there's an awful lot of flexibility in these numbers. This pie may look very different in 4 or 5 years. Is that fair?
Yes, that's absolutely correct.
Thank you.
I think it would be good for you to try to get through this, and then we can open it up for as much dialogue as we want.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So in putting this model together, the modeling is based on 4 emission reduction categories. Direct emissions, these are the emissions used directly by the city, which include fuels and natural gas for heating our buildings. Indirect emissions, which is primarily electricity, which is generated off-site but used directly by city facilities. Local renewable generation, that's the generation used directly by city facilities for projects that are generated on city property. And then there's the remote renewable generation, which would include the Tehiquis project and then the large wind project. So these are some of the strategies that I've modeled in for direct emission reductions, beginning with boiler efficiency. 112 metric ton reduction. The conversion of B20 to B50 biodiesel, that's about 58,000 gallons per year. That results in a 176 metric ton reduction. Gasoline to ethanol conversion for 48 vehicles, that's a net 202 metric ton reduction. Gasoline to compressed natural gas for 7 trucks and 1 large Vector truck, 16 metric tons net. The conversion of our existing hybrids to plug-in hybrids for 27 vehicles, 42 metric tons net, and conversion from standard gasoline using sedans to plug-in hybrid representing 40 units, 113 metric tons net. And some of the implementation costs and assumptions that I used are in that last column. Our strategy modeling for indirect emissions, these are our electricity offsets, would be lighting efficiency projects that would result in a net reduction of 400 metric tons per year. This would have a 2-year payback. So all of these items, really, energy efficiency are kind of no-brainer items, something that we can do right away. Heating, ventilating, and air conditioning controls would result in net 38 metric tons, 5-year payback. Variable speed pumping systems, converting from constant volume pumping to variable speed pumping, 313 metric tons with a 3-year payback. Heating, ventilating, and air conditioning efficiency, 85 metric tons with a 6-year payback. And pumping efficiency upgrades, 202 metric tons with a 5-year payback. Our local renewable generation projects would include a 750 kW recommissioning of the plant at the hydroelectric plant at Cater, which would result in a 984 metric ton reduction. Digester gas opportunities at El Estero, where we would increase the amount of methane through anaerobic digestion system and use that to generate electricity and heat for the processes at the El Estero waste facility. 656 metric tons. Solar thermal projects, 202 metric tons, and solar photovoltaic projects that would be primarily funded through a power purchase agreement, so wouldn't require a lot of upfront capital, 617 metric tons. Taking a closer look at the digester gas generation, we can take brown grease that's extracted from grease interceptors from restaurants, that is basically a waste right now, and food scraps, and add them into the anaerobic process at the El Estero waste treatment facility. And from that, we can produce additional methane. That methane could be fed into microturbines or fuel cells to generate electricity and heat that could be used at El Estero. Another assumption that I made is that we have 500 kilowatts of fuel cells right now at El Estero that will need to either be replaced or will need a contract extension of the existing power purchase agreement in 2015. So that would result in zero net reductions. It's just something that we would need to do to continue business as usual. So looking at the large renewable generation, that would include a large wind generation project primarily for the purpose of renewable energy credits or offsetting our emissions. That would result in 3,500 metric tons per year reduction by 2020. Then there's also the waste conversion technology that would be employed at Tahigas. That would represent 4,400 metric tons, primarily through a power purchase agreement. So a little closer look at wind generation. This would roll in at the very last year before carbon neutrality. We're assuming...
I was just saying I love that picture. Look at that as one big turbine. If you look at the human scale there. But sorry, I digress.
We're assuming the capital cost for implementing the project and siting it and getting it connected to the grid would be about $2,500 per kilowatt. This would be bond funded.
I'm sorry, how many kilowatts are you looking at generating through wind power?
I believe that it's in, here.
Well, I will get there. Oh, okay, never mind.
Yeah, I think it'll reveal itself, but it's in excess of 3,000 kilowatts. So this project, we would sell energy on the wholesale market, and we would keep the renewable energy credits for that as offsets. Some issues with wind generation. One of the issues is that we may not be able to fund this with tax-exempt bonds because the city would be operating as a business enterprise in the process, so that could be one factor. There's also other financial risks associated with this because it would be a commercial venture, so we would assume some risk in its operation. And the question also comes up, how is this different from purchasing certified carbon offsets? Offsets may be cheaper to buy on the market. I know that there's a lot of development with the CARB scoping plan now, and people are talking about developing carbon trading and carbon cap systems and making renewable energy credits kind of more legitimate. So there may be opportunities just to purchase offsets rather than to expose ourselves to risk. But I've modeled in wind in this model. These are some of the assumptions that I've made about the waste conversion technology at Tahigas. The waste conversion facility would be operated by a third party, and it would be primarily funded through tipping fees and through the sales of the power that's generated. The city would work with that third party and would develop a power purchase agreement where we can buy about 23% of the total generation that they have based on an 8 megawatt facility. And so I chose that number out of a feasibility that was done for the project, and so it was kind of a mean size out of all the projects that were chosen. So that would include, an 1,800 kilowatt project for us. Some of the issues. Currently, there's no way to wheel power from Tahigas to city operations. In other words, there's no way for us to generate the power at Tahigas and then deliver it to another account on city property yet. Future legislation may allow for that, and so that would need to happen in order for us to take advantage of this under the assumptions that I've made. If the deregulated energy market opens up, that could change that assumption. There's other things that could do that too, but right now there's no way for us to receive that power.
Question, Jim?
Sorry. Your assumption of an 8-megawatt facility purchasing back 23% of the output of the energy, you are also factoring in the reality that we are not the only jurisdiction that's operating this facility, or we're not operating the facility. A third party is going to operate the facility, but that this is a partnership agreement out at Tehiguas, that the county, it's their land and they're a partner, we're a partner. We've got Solvang, we've got Goleta, we've got all those. So 23% back, the operator is going to need to make money based on tipping fees and the production of power. So once they're taking their slice of the pie, we want 23%. And have you, in your calculations, have you factored back what the other partners to this equation are going to want for themselves as well?
The assumptions that I made were that I believe that the trash that the city of Santa Barbara delivers to Tehiguas is about 42% of the total.
Yeah.
And the other assumption that I made is that the third-party operator would need to sell that energy at wholesale prices onto the market, and so we could negotiate a price with them really, semi-independently, not completely independently, I understand that, but we would be negotiating with that third party as a taker of power. So I guess we could say that we could justify 42% of the total power used, and I'm only assuming, 23%. But otherwise, it would just be a matter of negotiating a rate that's acceptable and above the wholesale cost of energy.
Understood, but in your equations, you took into account the rest of the partners that are involved in.
Yes.
Thank you.
The other issue is that there is no guarantee that the project will actually be developed. This chart shows the estimated annual CO2 equivalent emissions by calendar year. So that top line, the top data set, is our business as usual, the magenta line. And you can see it trending down from 2011 downwards to 2020. That's primarily because Southern California Edison will be adding more renewable energy to the grid over time, so we'll see a reduction. Also, there's plan for the investor-owned utilities to have a target to reduce their increase their total renewables to 30% by 2020. So that's still being worked out. The second data set, the yellow data set, is business as usual, less energy conservation projects. So this is essentially how I built the model, starting with conservation and putting in local renewable generation, and then making assumptions about the waste conversion technology, and then whatever I couldn't make up from there, we brought in to offset with wind. So the cyan line, the light blue line there, represents the combination of the reductions from local renewables and conservation, and then the blue line represents all of the above plus the waste conversion technology. So that brings us down to, from a city operation, down to 3,200 metric tons per year. So the only thing that was left is to bring in wind, a way to offset our emissions in 2019. So we'd bring in about 3,300 metric tons there, and we would reach carbon neutrality by 2020. Okay, I gave you a handout, and I'm going to be switching back and forth from this presentation to this the handout, which is a summary of the carbon neutral by 2020 model. Beginning at the top with Table 1, this table provides a year-by-year net energy use by source and its respective CO2e factors. So let me get over to this spreadsheet here. So, for instance, the first resource would be electricity. And so in 2007, we used 23 million kilowatt hours of electricity, and then that decreases over time, based on this particular model. and the assumptions that I've made. So we're also making assumptions about the factors involved for the carbon dioxide emissions. So in this case, the assumption is 0.88 pounds per kilowatt hour. And so taking the information from this table 1, we can calculate table number 2. So table number 2 provides a year-by-year net CO2 equivalent emissions by source in metric tons. So looking at that a little more closely, beginning with electricity, natural gas, gasoline, biodiesel, CNG, and ethanol, these are the total carbon outputs from city emissions that would occur over time, all the way to 2020. And if you look at the last line of that, the total CO2 equivalent emissions, we're in a negative number, which represents carbon neutrality in 2020. Oh, I'm sorry. I had, yeah. This third table converts all of the information from table 1 into a common unit of gigawatt hours so that you can have an apples and apples comparison of what the effects of these different resources are, just for information purposes. Table 4 provides the cost of unbudgeted capital, maintenance, and solar photovoltaic cost in real dollars per year. So the unbudgeted capital is the capital funding needed to reduce the city's energy use through conservation and local renewable generation. So these are really all of the incremental costs that don't include the bond funding debt service.
And these costs are citywide, correct?
That's correct, and
Okay.
I'll provide a breakout of how how it's represented across the enterprise funds and the general fund a little bit later. I'll do it right now. This chart shows the unbudgeted capital and operation dollars per year to achieve carbon neutrality in real dollars by year, by fund, for the enterprise funds combined and for the general fund. So that gives you an idea about how the distribution would break out. So this does not include the bond debt service. This is just unbudgeted capital and operating expenses that are not currently identified or planned in our budget. Table number 5 shows the annual cost of purchase energy for the city operations by source and by year in real dollars. At the bottom of table 5, I've constructed what is the base case or business as usual case, and that line shows the anticipated annual cost of energy without further conservation or generation measures escalated by the assumptions that I made for inflation. So this would be table number 5. So right here is the total cost of our purchased energy by year. And so at the end, you can make a quick comparison of what the cost of energy by year purchase would be for the carbon neutral case versus business as usual. Table 6 is simply the net cash flow from the operating activities from wind, which really doesn't occur until 2019. And so that represents the gross profit that we would make on operations only for that project. So that does not include the bond debt service or any of the financing activities. Table number 7 has detail on the energy bond funding. And so on the top of that table, it has the cash outlays that we would need in order to fund these projects in the year that we need to fund them. So on this line, we have the 2015 bond that would be primarily water operations, and then we'd have below that the 2018 general fund bond for the energy bond for that. And so below that, I have the actual cost, what the this would be the actual bond right here and the year that it was sold. So it'd be $11 million in 2015 and $13 million in 2018, two separate bonds.
Just briefly, I noticed that in these bond servicing tables that you don't have a bond for CT. Are you not anticipating selling bonds to fund our portion of the CT?
I modeled two different conversion technologies. One of them would be at El Estero and would be added to their process. So that would be the food scrap and brown grease that I'm also considering
okay,
conversion technology. And apart from that, I'm only looking at Tahigas as a power purchase agreement. So we're assuming that
right.
no upfront capital. So I mean that would be a separate decision completely for the city. Okay.
While you're doing that, just to verify, it's related to Table 5, and then as you get into cost savings at the bottom that we're looking at 9 and 10, the base case scenario of the annual cost of purchased energy moving out towards 2020, the assumptions there, if you could explain what your assumptions were of what energy is going to cost between now and 2020 to establish that base case. I didn't catch that if you mentioned it earlier. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm assuming that, we're using 2007 as a base case and that we are not implementing any of the projects from that point forward. And then I'm escalating the cost of energy by 4.5% or 1.5% real inflation.
And you picked that number because why?
It appears to be a standard number that most people are using right now for what they anticipate the future will be. I mean, I also have a table set up at your request at the end of this that makes some other assumptions about that.
Okay.
And we can look at that to see
Thank you.
what. Yeah. Okay, Table 8 shows the incremental cost by year for carbon neutrality by 2020. So this provides the bond debt service for the two energy bonds, the revenue from wind operations, the total of the capital and maintenance costs from Table 4, and the potential city funding provided by the Sustainability Capital Fund. So the revenue from wind operations and the funded costs are negative, so they provide a credit for this. So Table 8 provides the incremental cost per year for carbon neutrality. That's correct. So this would be the total cost according to the model.
I'm sorry,
Question?
you used a term that I'm unfamiliar with, and that could just be me. The Sustainability Fund? Is there such a thing? What is that?
It's what we
Pot
call
of money I don't know about, but go ahead.
Maybe Mr. Armstrong could explain
Jim,
that.
would you like to tell me where this
I think it was last year we put in the general fund capital, what was it, $200,000 a year for sustainability improvements. And so it's not really a fund, it's just an assumption that we'll continue to fund at that level.
And that's something that we are going to be funding at $200,000 every year? Is that including the next couple of years?
We're looking at it right now for next year, but Jim just made the assumption it would be continued
Okay,
at that
all
level.
right. Thank you.
Well, the number's here 100,000. So just to be clear on the number on the table 8. So is that the number, or is it 200,000?
The number that I assumed would be 100,000 because we wouldn't be using all of this according to this model.
Okay, so the budget line item's been 200,000, and you're taking 100 of that
that what we
into
put
this
in,
model.
It's a facilities maintenance, facilities cost overall. So
Which
you
gets
have-
spread back.
Yeah. So it's part of the facilities budget.
It's part of the facilities budget. I'm just saying to the mic, to the TV, because you're not on
Yeah.
mic. Okay.
Essentially, I use that budget for improvements to our building mechanical systems for efficiency and so on. So that really is a capital account. But with that, I'm also able to get substantial energy savings. And so, in essence, it is a renewable.
So it's something you're
Element.
using anyway to promote efficiencies within current facilities, and we're incorporating that into this model because it also creates energy efficiency.
Correct.
Okay.
Because I wanted to reflect that things that were really set-asides for, renewability or, renewable.
And that's fine, but this fund was
Issues.
only created last year. And how was it created?
We basically took some general fund money and put it there. The other thing I just mentioned is that in all likelihood, we'll continue to fund at approximate level, mainly if you saw those paybacks on the conservation measures, 3, 4, 5-year paybacks. It makes sense to do those projects because we reduce ongoing operational costs.
Yeah, no, I'm just
Yeah.
trying to get clear where it came from and how it got started. Thanks.
So Table 9 provides the bottom line of this model. So essentially, it provides the projected savings of carbon neutrality by 2020 model over the business as usual case. So the savings are determined by the base case less the annual cost of purchase energy from the tables I've already shown you, less the incremental cost from Table 8. So that's the year-by-year analysis, and I've also brought that out to the year 2030 because I'm incorporating cash flows all the way through 2030, from the present to 2030. This also shows the net present value of all of those savings between 2007 and 2030, discounted by 5%, which would be $3.3 million. And maybe I should show that. This would be Table 9 right here. This would be the net present value and the cash flows over time. Okay, this table was set up at the request of the Council Sustainability Committee, and I assumed fixed factors for the gross wind profit of 4 cents per kilowatt hour and the fixed real energy inflation of 1.5%. So this table shows the sensitivity of the net present value of carbon neutrality by 2020 based on various assumptions, beginning with 0% real energy inflation all the way to 2.5% real energy inflation, and a loss of gross wind profit of 2 cents per kilowatt hour versus a profit of 6 cents per kilowatt hour. So the red numbers show negative net present value. So essentially that means that we would have net losses by going with carbon neutrality in that area. In the areas that are in black, that would be net savings in present dollars. So next steps, the Council Sustainability Committee at the February 5th meeting recommended that Council pursue a goal to achieve carbon neutrality by 2020 and attempt to secure financing to reach that goal. So for the Finance Committee, the next step would be to provide input to on the preliminary financial feasibility plan to achieve carbon neutrality, and to make a recommendation to Council whether to pursue the carbon neutral goal.
That may or may not occur today, though.
That's correct.
Just so that you know.
I know that there's a lot of information here, and I haven't sent you the detail of the model. I'm sure there's a lot of things that you would want to see, and so
Yeah, indeed, there are quite a few things. So I know that there's a public that wants to speak. Is it the pleasure of the committee to let public speak at this point and then go to our questioning? Is that okay with everybody? Then which microphone shall they use, assuming that there's a couple of people here at least that want to speak? So please, I see Tam and Dave, and please introduce yourself. And I think since the idea came from you guys, we'll let you go at least 5 minutes.
Well, let me just do a very, very brief introduction, and then Tam actually has a presentation, which we are indulgent. I think it's probably 10. One, your staff analysis, we must compliment. You got an incredible staff, and if you didn't realize it now, he's really done an incredible job. I don't know of another city which has done this type of analysis, not only setting the goal, because people set lofty goals, but to actually have at least the framework for an implementation plan and to attempt to cost out the feasibility of that, simply from a financial standpoint. And you haven't weighed in there if you will, the benefits to society of the indirect externalities, the air quality, carbon issues of climate change, which is all in that larger equation which you're contributing to as a leader. So your staff has just really done an excellent job, and I think sets the roadmap on how other communities could do it. And I think that's one of the reasons why we challenged you to look at this. As we go forward, that sensitivity analysis starts to get at it, but there are going to be both new opportunities in terms of what happens with renewables and what happens with the financing of renewables that we believe will be on the positive side. There will also be new constraints and costs, which we haven't quantified or you haven't been able to throw into the thing. So what we're looking at, you're making this, if you will, a commitment to a goal, a long-term goal. 2020 still is a long-term goal. A roadmap to get there, recognizing opportunities and costs are going to come along, and councils over time will have to evaluate the actual feasibility to take the next step on that roadmap. But we think you've done a great job of costing out the fact that it is quote-unquote feasible under what we believe are fairly conservative analysis of the cost of energy in the future. As you know, we really believe the cost of energy is really going to change dramatically in the next 5 to 10 years, and that it's going to ripple through everything that we do. And what you're doing here is looking at not only the whole question of carbon neutrality from the environmental standpoint, but essentially energy stability in terms of the cost to your community. And the economic benefits of that aren't going to be able to be quantified in a spreadsheet, but you know that those are going to be there. And to be prepared to actually have a roadmap to get there. One thing I'll just comment on before I give it over to Tam. Really pleased to see that the Conversion Technology Project can play such a large role in this. Again, being leaders in the field is something which that actually shows there are all kinds of benefits coming off of that project and why it should be pursued to the further levels. And so that was just a really pleasing. There are different alternatives, different renewables, but to see Jim look at that one, which is something that you, as the city, could do with the county and see multiple benefits coming back is just really commendable. So let me give it to Tam, and we do have some other comments.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Tam, and I just want to say that I certainly agree with Dave's comment about the staff support on this. It is a very thorough and excellent job, and really pleased. So, Tam, you have about 10 minutes.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
While Jen pulls it up, just want to definitely echo Dave in thanking staff and your leadership to date on this issue. It's really great to see a very nice model put together to actually put some meat behind what is a very ambitious goal and set an example. And as you all know, cities in California talk. And I'm sure the talk is already spreading right now on this and say, look, what's Santa Barbara doing with their model? Can we get a copy of that model? And let's do it ourselves. And that's definitely our intent with our program, is to create various models that then ripple outwards and have a larger effect. If I make it this. So the carbon neutral planning is a big piece of our initiative to wean our region from fossil fuels. And the idea is to really set these ambitious goals, but make them achievable and realistic as a way of getting real on-the-ground change and having key entities in our region do this planning and actually follow through and show what is possible. And so we've actually done plans like this already for the city itself, for Fairview Farms, for Midland School up in Los Olivos, Valle Verde retirement home, and we're talking to various other entities in our region about doing this. And again, this is a way to get on the ground real change in a fairly short amount of time.
Just as an aside, the mayor and I both visited Valle Verde this week, or last week, whatever it was, and got an excellent showing of what they plan to do out there. It was really quite exciting.
And the board has approved this goal of being carbon neutral in 10 years, and so we're now following with them to do the detailed planning, working with the Bren School. And as a little aside, because I think it's important in terms of what I'm talking about today, is that you all know me as an advocate of CEC, as an attorney, but I'm also an academic. I teach climate change law and policy at the Bren School and energy law and policy, so I have a pretty good feel for what's going on in our broader state and federal picture here. So this is the plan we put together about a year and a half ago for the city. Actually, this is not the plan. This is the current snapshot, or back in 06. This is what they call a Sankey diagram, and it shows just in one nice picture your total energy flows. So on the left, you have all your inputs. On the right, you have your outputs. In the middle, you have the various sectors. And so as you can see, you have kind of skinny green lines, which are the renewables right now, some coal, some nuclear power, a lot of natural gas. It's in fact the bulk of your power consumption comes from natural gas, either directly or indirectly, and then some gasoline and diesel.
You said coal, and then you said renewable in the same breath.
If I did, I didn't mean to. I said some renewables, the skinny green lines, then some coal.
And some coal, okay.
And some coal.
But you're not considering coal as a renewable?
Certainly not, certainly not.
Thank you.
And nor is nuclear.
Okay. Just checking.
So this is, in fact, the one possible plan. And so to address your question, Ms. Falcone, this is one possible permutation that could get us to carbon neutrality. And Jim's permutation is similar, not identical to this. And so there are many ways you can get there. This is our modeling of one possible way, and it relies heavily on, as you can see, wind, small hydro, solar, and biomass and waste to energy. Natural gas is reduced dramatically, as is gasoline through efficiency and conservation. And on the right-hand side, if you compare the charts, you have useful energy, meaning the energy actually, get some use out of, at 71%, which is quite good for current operations, rising to 83.5% by 2020. So the system itself is more efficient. And you probably know this, but I'll just review for the audience here that the majority of the city's emissions come from indirect emissions through electricity production. And so the obvious target is electricity. If you can sub out your current electricity with renewables and through increased efficiency, you will make the biggest bang for the buck. This is a different depiction showing your reference case energy demand over time, meaning the business as usual through 2020. And we project simply that it rises by 1% per year through 2020, such that your total energy demand in gigawatt hours, for apples-to-apples comparison, rises by 2020. The solar at the top represents the facility right here at Garden Street that's now online. In our carbon neutral case, we have efficiency and conservation leading, representing 30% of the reductions. Rooftop solar grows to about 3 facilities like the one on this roof here. And then the electricity piece, which I'll show in a second, is the key because that becomes renewable over time, completely renewable. And I'll add here, the new developments in the last year make rooftop solar or ground mount solar very promising because you can, in fact, now finance facilities with no upfront cost, as we did for this facility here. But there's also new tools in the works that allow net metering in a more aggressive way. And we're actually right now working with Pedro Nava to pass a bill that would allow extended net metering, where you can, in fact, build facilities up to 10 miles outside your jurisdiction that are also net metered. So a lot more flexibility in the next couple of years for solar, such that solar could be a much bigger piece of this pie than we have here currently. Reference case for electricity, simply showing, natural gas is the predominant source, as you probably know, in California. Nuclear, second, geothermal, about 5%. Wind and coal is being phased out over time by law in California, so by 2025 or so, it will be gone entirely. And the fuel cells at the bottom represent your current fuel cells from El Estero. In the carbon neutral case, it's jagged because we have projects coming in given years. And the natural gas in this model essentially takes up the slack. So as small hydro and wind, et cetera, comes online, the natural gas piece is phased out. And that's not reality. That's just how it's modeled here.
Question here, Tim?
Yeah, Tam, speaking of reality, where do you envision getting hydro of any kind, small or otherwise?
The Cater treatment plant, the small hydro is.
Explain that just in 3 sentences. Small
It's a plant owned by the city already. It's been
I know
it's being
Cater,
decommissioned. So it's small hydroelectric. It's under a megawatt, and it basically uses the water coming in from Gibraltar.
Okay, it does. That's the one that's down. Then okay,
It was
because we
decommissioned.
recommissioned the
It could
one
be
at the
recommissioned.
tunnel.
Exactly.
We recommissioned the one at the tunnel, but we haven't put that one back. So okay, so that's what you're considering is
Exactly.
Anything else?
Exactly.
okay.
Well, it depends on there's a study being done right now for the city that's looking at the total system in our region and its potential for small hydro. So there could be other projects possibly. We don't model that, though. And conversion, this refers to Tahiguas coming online. We have here by 2010. Obviously, that's not correct. And as we know, it's not even guaranteed that it will happen. But again, one possible scenario. And the real take-home here is that because of the flexibility regarding net metering and solar and wind being very competitive economically, there are many ways you can do this. So it's not a question of feasibility. The question is how you do it and exactly how you phase it out. When you compare the emissions in the reference case to the carbon neutral case, the reference case, as Jim showed, in fact goes down over time because of Edison phasing out coal and bringing online more renewables. So that's good, but it's not carbon neutral. We show here the carbon neutral line going to almost zero, but not quite because of remaining vehicle emissions, and that's where offsets come in. And I'll talk about offsets in a second relating to wind power. Just very quickly on the assumptions here. Our cost analysis does deal with all-in costs, meaning all the relevant costs, including capital cost, tax credits, which may apply for the city under various new legislation, because other entities can claim the tax credit even though you don't pay taxes.
Bond debt service.
Bond debt service is in here, amortization costs, and savings from electricity and natural gas. We assume the current rate for Edison electricity rising at 1.5% each year, so we have constant $08. We're not considering nominal dollars. Just very quickly, this shows our assumptions for energy costs. Again, a levelized cost, an all-in cost, and essentially most of them are level over time in a conservative assumption. And we have, in this case, we have some rising in cost over time, and there's actually an overlap with that first line that goes up, so I can't tell you which one it is, but the bottom one is...
Question, Tim?
Just you have out of area biomass, out of area geo, out of area, so out of area. But are there transmission systems, or would that also need to be laid as part of the capital infrastructure?
The out of area phrase refers to Edison. And so essentially when they bring online new renewables, we're saying
so you can,
these are the costs for them.
You can bracket those 4 out-of-area systems and call it all Edison, and they do have the transmission infrastructure.
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly. As opposed to the city owning its own facilities.
Yeah. No. That's my point.
And with the carbon neutral costs, it's actually almost exactly the same, except we assume that out-of-area solar does decline in cost over time because solar is, as you probably know, the next big thing for renewables. It's becoming quickly cost competitive. The utilities are, in fact, bringing online major new projects around the state. And the question is really a matter of timing, and the current credit crisis, of course, is impacting these projects, but we're hopeful that in the next 6 months to a year that will be corrected. So when you compare the all-in costs you get in the reference case, total cost of about $6.3 million, rising to almost $8 million per year by 2020. And in the carbon neutral case, you're at about 4.5 or so. And I'll fully admit this is not a crystal ball. We don't know in 2020 what things will really cost. That's why you do projections, to basically put your best guess as to what the future holds. And we have to consider realistic assumptions and consider the best information we have today, which is what we've done here. So financing options are very important here. As Jim mentioned, you can do a lot of this with PPAs, or power purchase agreements, where there's no upfront cost to the city. And so you basically contract to buy power through a contract over time at a set cost, usually with some kind of escalator built in. So you actually know your costs up front for the life of that contract. You can do PPAs for wind power and also other renewables, and there are some companies out there that will basically finance any project if you can show them this is a good project. And so if capital costs are really the big issue, there are options to basically eliminate, or at least reduce substantially, the capital cost. And again, the caveat that right now the PPA model is kind of rocky because of the economic crisis, but again, it will get back on track fairly soon in my view. You also have low-interest loans from the other CEC, the younger CEC, the Energy Commission, up to $3 million. And that's a pretty good source of funding for various projects. And then last, CREBS bonds. These are community renewable energy bonds from the federal government, and these are zero-interest bonds. And just today, the stimulus package was passed by the Senate. It will be hopefully signed by the President by the end of the week. And that authorized almost $2 billion in bonds for this year alone. So with the President and California going full steam ahead in carbon mitigation, it's, I think, unthinkable that this program will not be expanded, and therefore provide a lot of opportunities for funding these kind of projects at zero interest again. So the end result is that you could actually do almost all of this with very little upfront capital if, again, that is the major concern. Efficiency is another option here. I'm not recommending this because I've heard from some folks, including Jim here, that ESCOs are not the best deal if you have the money. So if you have the money, you should do it yourself. If you don't have the money, you can work with an ESCO, which basically does it for you, and you share in the savings. So the end result is that we actually find about 25 million net savings by 2020. And again, who knows how accurate this is? I'll be honest with you, because there's a lot of uncertainties here. But these are projections. And so, again, we have to be realistic and conservative, which we have been. And Jim's figure is quite a bit lower than this. And so, I couldn't say ours is better than his or his is better than ours. But at this point, this is a figure that is defensible, given what we know and given what we know about the future. And I want to just close. One more slide. Let me show this first. This is a chart showing the annual savings and the cumulative savings, just so showing visually what I just told you, that in each year you have these savings that come out of the model, given the assumptions we put in, which I talked about. And then last, I want to close this on the opportunity, because there's a lot of opportunity here. Direct opportunity through savings from increased efficiency and conservation. You can sometimes save money through PPAs, and this depends a lot on the escalation in utility costs, which you don't know up front, unfortunately, because you can't know the future with any certainty. And then last, you will, by developing this plan and approving it, really position yourself well for state and federal funds. As I already mentioned, the President and California are going full speed ahead on carbon mitigation. And there's a lot of money available to do this, especially for those jurisdictions that have a plan in place to receive those funds. So I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay, I'm going to take about a 2-minute break, unless there's specific questions for Tim, and then we'll bring it back to the committee. If not, take about a 2-minute break. Order at this point. I want to thank Dave and Tam. It's a lucky community to have committed citizens that are willing to take the time and effort to do a thing like this and to help us in conjunction with our city staff to try to work on an issue that's of very high importance to the community. So at this point, unless there's specific questions for any of the presenters, I'd like to bring it back to the committee and take your thoughts on where do we go from here. Ms. Schneider.
Thank you. First off, I really want to thank Jim Dewey for an incredible amount of work, and I know we asked for a lot, and you, I think, under-promised and over-delivered, so thank you for that. And again, also to CEC for keeping our feet to the fire and putting the challenge out there and seeing if we can meet it. And we have a lot of information here, and I know there's I've been fortunate enough to hear Jim's presentation now a second time with days in between. So I'm at an advantage here since being the presentation at the Sustainability Committee to have that. So I understand if there's going to be a lot more questions coming in, and I still have questions on the how. And I guess I'll just start the conversation by saying I think there are two things happening here. One is, do we as a council, as a city, want to establish a goal? Yes or no? And, you know, whether that's 2020, 2030, 2025, I mean, but the philosophy of do we want to actually pursue the idea of going carbon neutral at all or not is the first question. And just first to answer that question, I think that's something that we should look into very seriously. I think there are ways we can be both environmentally strong and fiscally sound. And the phrase that I heard earlier that I think we really need to take into consideration into the long-term future is looking at the economic benefits of energy stability. You know, there issues dealing with fossil fuels and carbon concerns are global and volatile, and the more we can be more efficient, the better off we'll be. And we're already doing that to some extent in terms of our efficiencies and seeing cost savings. So it's not like doing some of the stuff is going to cost us money. We're already working in that direction. But I agree that setting a goal that the city will be carbon neutral by 2020 is a big statement. And I also agree that we don't just like saying goals because they sound good. We want to back it up. And I look to the example of our diversion rate that was set back a while ago of going 70% of diversion by 2010. 2010's next year. And when that goal was first set, I don't think the council then knew exactly how or if we were going to make it to that point, and we may not make 70% by 2010, although we're pretty darn close. And but things have changed in terms of policies, in terms of funding opportunities and philosophies between when that goal was set and now. But we still have that goal, and I think that's important for us to keep our eye on the prize and look to the future. So that's the first piece I think we need to even think about. The second piece, which goes with the first piece, is how do you get there? And what Jim Dewey brought to us is one of a whole host of number of models I'm sure we could see. But this was one based on certain assumptions, based on the best information that we have right now. There are some things that are in here that are completely within the city's control in terms of upgrading our own facilities, being more energy efficient, how we deal with vehicle purchasing and so forth. And then there are a lot of things that are somewhat in our control or some way totally out of our control. And I think that's the big questions we're going to have, especially here at Finance Committee, is, how much do we weigh in on some things that are out of our control? And I think, as Councilmember Falcone mentioned, a lot of questions about CT, the convergent technology at Tehiguis is a huge question. I think, but at the same time, putting this in the model really shows our city's good faith effort in moving forward with the commitment we've set up so far and saying, yes, we're serious about this, we want to look at this, and we think, and originally we were looking at this for conversion technology to reduce the landfill volume, but now also there's another benefit to it as well. So But will it happen in 2015? It might not happen at all. And if it doesn't happen, that's 36% of the full pie that we were looking at. That's a big number. So the question of how, there's no way this finance committee today or tomorrow or the next week or next month will be able to answer every single question. But I think if we come from a place where we put a model to look at that, we can try to be nimble and flexible over time. We look at what's happening federally and statewide in terms of financing options that will become available. The whole philosophy in Washington, D.C. is changing dramatically. And for us to have a goal in place and to have some modeling that we can move around as feasible will put us in a great position when those opportunities come up in Washington, D.C. or Sacramento or elsewhere. So I'm happy with taking our time and answering the questions that this Finance Committee needs to answer, because I think we'll be stronger for it in terms of when, I'd like to see the council set the goal. I'll be upfront, and I said that at the Sustainability Committee, but I don't want that to be a hollow statement. I want it with the backing, and if that means we need to wrestle some more time with some questions, I'm totally fine with that. But that's where I'd like to start. So I'd love to hear the questions that my committee members have as well.
Okay, Ms.
Thank you.
Falcone.
Sure. Let me start again by saying thank you so very much to Jim, in particular, both Jims, and Bob and Nina out there, and also to Dave and Tam. You've been really active the last couple of years here, guys. You keep coming to us with all these things and programs that are wonderful ideas, absolutely stellar goals to set and milestones to try to achieve. And the old adage is nothing's free. And but we keep doing them, we keep plugging away and trying to do our best. And you come to us now with really, really big deal. This is huge. This affects the entire organization. This affects the day-to-day, how we proceed in operations. So setting lofty goals is a wonderful thing, and I'm all for that. The Tibetans say point yourself in the right direction and keep walking. So that's what I'm doing, and I know that we're all walking on this journey together. That being said, this is a big deal. I think that the goal is, of course, what we all want to achieve, obviously. I mean, I haven't been working in the recycling and the trash, world with my dainty self, for all these years because it's glamorous. It's because it's necessary, and this is necessary. I'm not comfortable with the date. Makes me squirrely, given that it's 2010 for all intents and purposes, and that's 10 years. And we all know that in governmental time and in organizational time, that's a millisecond, because we move at glacial paces as opposed to real time. And David, you know this better than anybody else. So it makes me take pause for the date, not the goals, but the date. I do not like setting up goals and milestones to achieve without the specter of reality. If I set a goal, I'm going to achieve it. I want to achieve it. When I say I'm going to do it, I'll do it. So I don't think this is achievable by 2020. I just don't. There's a lot of moving pieces to this puzzle. Do I think it's achievable? Sure, because that's where we have to go. This is the reality of it. But, this business of 70% by 2010 I knew wasn't achievable when folks wanted to do it and say it. And it's not. We're not going to do it. But, we keep plugging away at it. We keep plugging away. I think we're at 64% diversion, state certified at this point. When we get recertified, it may be a little more, but it won't be 70. Maybe 67 or 68. So although I'm 100% behind all of these ideas and have been working diligently with Salud Carbajal for a number of years to try to get this CT partnership going. I mean, that's where it came from. To see it play such a prominent role in this particular equation, knowing so intimately the reality of that conversation is a little is a little unnerving. I'm going to continue to work really hard, no matter what, to try to achieve a CT facility out at Tehiguas with all of the partners involved, including Goleta and Solvang, maybe even Carpinteria and Buellton, and it's still in its infancy though. Wind had just been sited out in Lompoc by a private company. It did get sited. It's not up and going, but how many more of those are we going to be able to site around, and how far out will some future legislation allow us to go? What is Edison actually going to be able to do? I mean, Hal Conklin and I talk about this all the time, because we both travel around with the League of Cities. And I know they're working really, really hard. But it's not easy. Siting these facilities is difficult. You've got all the CEQA, you've got all the environmental constraints. So I just want to be real about what we're doing here, because I want to get there, but I don't want to do it in some sort of pie-in-the-sky, Pollyanna-ish, oh, we're going to do this. No, we need to actually do it logically. We need to do it based in reality, and we need to do it in a full analysis. And Jim, your analysis is the best effort at really educated guesses that I've seen in a really long time. But as we have to be real about it, it is guesses. They are projections. They are guesses. And if this happens, then that could. But there are a lot of qualifiers in the sentence I just said. So I need a lot more information. There are so many unknowns here. I'm all for saying, yeah, let's get there. In fact, there are a lot of, in your PowerPoint here, there were a lot of items that I consider to be just do-its. I think we can go forward and just do some of these things now. We have to find the money. That's the other thing. In these economic times, we're going to have to get to a place where we're going to have to be really, really clear about our priorities. Now, this whole carbon neutrality and getting away from fossil fuels and so forth is definitely a priority for me. That being said, with a finite amount of money and money going away all the time, and I don't think it's going to come back soon. I think it's going to be a couple of years before we actually get back to a place where we can have funds to do the nice things. I mean, we have to keep the city, safe. We have to keep it clean. We have to do the infrastructure. We have to do. Now, are there ways, based on what you've provided us today and what you, Tam, have provided us, CEC has provided us over the time, that we can redirect some funds and do things more efficiently? Yeah, absolutely. And I think we need to do that. I certainly can't adopt anything today, but I wanted to give you a clear understanding of where my thought process is. And I'm with you. I am. I'm totally with you. With the exception of I can't do it today. And I'm squirrely about the date. It's too soon. I mean, why say it if you can't do it? I mean, deliver what you say. Don't, throw stuff out there just to sound like you are all PC and so forth, So, I guess those are my comments as far as today. I don't have any idea what kind of action you're looking for, if any, but that's where I am, and I look forward to going forward and getting there. I'm just not quite sure how and with what, but we'll get there.
Oh, thanks, colleagues. I think that any department in the city needs to have goals, and we have an entire program called P3, which Mr. Armstrong has brought in and which I support, because an organization of our size without goals can't really know where you've been or where you're headed. So it's essential that we have goals, and I think that the goals that we've talked about today are good, positive, and probably the direction we should head in. I'm looking at this more, I guess, from the standpoint of the Finance Committee, and as chair of the Finance Committee, there's a this model that we've just looked at kind of has two separate phases to it for me. There's a technology phase which deals with a wide variety of technologies that may or may not happen. Ms. Falcone has touched on those, and there's others in the audience that are far more capable than I am of addressing how accurate or how feasible the technology is. I think that Jim has taken the very best stab at it that he can. And it may be that there's some technology in the laboratories right now that we hope will come forth. I know in the sense of battery technology, there's things that looks like they'll be coming to market, but we don't know for sure. But anyway, there's that whole realm, and I don't particularly need to know any more about it, except that to have your assurances that what you put forth is correct. Then there's for me, the ones that I'm more worried about are the financial assumptions. And I think that there's we could make a list. I don't intend to do that right now. We can do that offline. But there's a series of financial assumptions in here that need to be proven, I believe, not by Mr. Dewey's department, but by the Finance Department. I would like to see us take this whole package here and break it out, and we can do that in a work session, or we can do it however staff wants to do it, and look at these financial assumptions on a one-by-one basis. The economy that we face right now as a city looks like maybe the worst ever, and we don't know where the bottom of this thing is. And I'm convinced that if anybody says they do know where the bottom is, then they don't know what they're talking about. We have just completed meetings with local business organizations, and things are certainly not as bright as they could be by a long shot. That relates to the ability to even do some of the financial transactions that we've talked about here. In the airport right now, we're looking at a large bond, and we've put the whole process on hold, waiting to know what will happen in the bond market. I don't know what the bond market is going to do with projects like this, and I don't know that we'll be able to find out. The thing that concerns me in terms of where to take this today is that I don't know the time period in which clarity will come to the financial side enough for us to set forth a plan that makes sense, as Falcone and Schneider have said, that we can then hold to. I don't want to put forth a plan that we can't hold to. But there is so much unknown in the financial markets right now that I don't want to say, for example, bring it back in 45 days or 60 days, and then we will decide, because I don't know what the time span is when we will have clear information. I think that we could, at this point, ask the finance staff to work on this and try to prove the financial assumptions that Mr. Dewey has made, and we may want to look at this again in a few weeks or even later. I don't know, when we have a little bit more clarity. But for me, I think to try to wrap up where I'm positioned on it, I'm for the goals. I don't want to lock the city down into financial assumptions that we have no way of backing up and no way of even knowing what they will be. And I need to have, I think, finance staff to work with Mr. Dewey and to see what we can come up with to prove the models financially. My hunch is that at this time we're going to get to a place where we simply don't know what the answers are. And then there's not much more we can do with it. So I guess I'm going to ask Mr. Armstrong. I'm saying that, I guess to summarize, I don't think any of us are ready to move this to council at present. What were you expecting us to do other than to give you the comments?
Well, at some point, I think this committee has to make a recommendation to the council, just like the Sustainability Committee has, because I think really the council assigned it to both committees for recommendations. If there's specific issues that you want finance to review, we can. I mean, one is we could do a little more work on the ability to sell bonds to build facilities out of area, although the laws may change. There's still big ifs here, though. The conversion technology project, for example, is, it's 35% of the full, package here. Now, I think the alternative would be what we'd probably say is, well, if that's not available, then we'd do 60% wind instead of 30% wind or whatever to make up the difference. That's probably the most logical solution that you would have there. And then that just goes back to that other equation of, will you be able to do that? I think if you want us to come back with additional information or answer questions, we can. But I think at some point you're going to need to make a recommendation to the whole council, either up or down. We think this is a good idea or not.
Okay, Ms. Snyder?
Thank you. I'm a little wary of asking finance staff to look into a crystal ball and tell us something when they won't know the answers for something that might occur in 2015 or 2019 when we're looking at these bonds, or 2018. So I'm fine to get another look through from finance to look at these assumptions. I do want to emphasize in the model here, in terms of cost in the next couple of years, because I know the current economic issues in our own budget is of prime consideration, is the economic cost that we're looking at in this particular model is much, much less in the first couple of years as opposed to moving out into the future where there's a lot more unknowns. So, and the numbers here, again, are citywide, not just general fund, but citywide. In fact, a huge, significant proportion of it is our enterprise funds, are things, like was said earlier, we want to do anyway. If we're going to have a fuel cell cater, we want to do that anyway, and that's where some of this cost is. So I'm happy with what the committee's saying of take it one more look. What I don't want to see happen is to set them up to, they're going to have to come back saying, we don't know the answers to what's going to happen from 2012 onward, because laws could change, financing abilities, could change, the economy globally and nationally will change, I hope. So I think we need to put some parameters around what exactly we're asking staff to do in order to help us make the policy decision of whether or not we're going to set the goal. And maybe the other option when they come back is, maybe 2030 is a date to look at. Our general plan is 2030. Do you incorporate in that, does that stretch things out and help us in terms of being more flexible by putting it out to 2030? I think the goal's still there. And, if we get to 85% in 2020, my gosh, what a great accomplishment that would be. And if it takes a little longer, fine. So if we're happier by saying 2030 or 2025, that's okay. But I think the Finance Committee is not going to be able to tell us what our philosophy and our policy should be about setting the goal, yes or no. They're just going to give us their best estimates in terms of numbers and the financial outlook as much as they can. So I'd just be a little wary about asking them to do the impossible. And I think we need a timeline of when this would come back.
Okay, Ms. Falcone.
Well, I'm not sure what the date is. I'm not sure we need a date. But here's my idea. My idea is that, as I said before, there are things in your presentation that are just do-its. There are things that we want to achieve and move forward with. I would be happy to recommend to council that we are in favor of pursuing a carbon neutral stance, period. And that we recommend that there are items that we should look for funding now and then work toward continue to work toward conversion technologies, explore more fully the feasibility of wind. Sort of statements that are achievable, but I do think that there's a lot that we can do, and I'm wondering whether or not we want to break that out. In other words, take this apart and look at the things that we do want to do going forward that are achievable and within our control, have staff break that out, and then make a recommendation to council as to specifics that we think we should do in order to achieve this goal that we think that they should adopt, because they're the ones who are going to adopt it. We're not going to do anything here, really. As far as the package of this, carbon neutrality by 2020, in this climate and going forward, if we want to move positively and aggressively forward, I think we need to deconstruct this in order to be able to achieve positive action, but maybe not in the way currently presented. So I put that out to you, Tam and Dave, to think about that, because it's clear we all want to get there. But adopting a package, I don't know if there's a list throughout the state of California and throughout the country that you want Santa Barbara's name on. I mean, there's notches on belts that very often happen with things like this. It happens with, a number of programs that, people are creating a list of jurisdictions that are on board kind of thing. I don't know if that's part of what's at play with the package, but I think the reality of the situation for us, if you really want to help us get to where we all want to go, the phone just walked off the table by itself. It couldn't take it anymore.
Couldn't take it anymore.
But do you understand where I'm sort of going with that? I think that we can achieve some positive movement. I'm not sure we can do it within that package.
Mr. Davis, you have some comments.
If I could comment on that. I take an exception to putting notches on a belt and looking across the state. And yes, you have Al Gore who's talking about.
I don't think you're doing that.
Let me get back to a point which I think is, and we didn't spend a lot of time again because we've been here before. The issues of energy, both in terms of cost, security, independence, economic vitality, which comes off of that, and the questions of climate change, which are bigger than you. But we came to you, and again, our mission basically is saying, Santa Barbara, as it has done in recycling, because that was our previous thing, right? We didn't wait to see if, in fact, other standards. We basically said there's an issue here. And we have issues here with energy and climate change, which what we're talking about today, we can do these or things, and not look at an aggressive goal to 2020. It is business as usual. And it is reactive rather than being proactive. We basically said we believe that you have the ability to be a leader in this country to show how it can be done. And we can show you that economically, under certain conditions, you can actually get there. And in fact, we think all of the, if you will, unquestionables within a decade are going to be more in your favor than the other way. Maybe they won't. In a council, in a CEC at that point, we'll be looking at readjusting that goal, readjusting the roadmap, which you should do. But we believe that what's going to happen, I'll tell you, I believe that in fact the issues we have with energy and climate change when we come out of this economic recession are going to be staring us in the face, that they're going to be the lead weights on trying to get out of this recession. Right? It's nice to have low energy costs because demand's down, but we want to push demand back up. When we push demand back up, the energy costs are going to go back up. These numbers, they're going to go up. Edison's already at the PUC asking for 20% increase. 1.5% real increase during this time? Oh, come on. So these are conservative. The challenge wasn't to do business as usual, that these are exceptionally unusual times that we believe the city, again, can be the leader. You do this, and again, this is altruistic and all of the things that in fact, people who try to push the envelope, there is a lot of altruism in terms of we, this community, can show how it can be done. And if other communities follow our lead. And in fact, that becomes, just like recycling, the way communities are moving towards providing economic security, environmental protection, long-term vitality to their communities on the questions of energy, which we believe is going to strip this entire society if we don't deal with it. And waiting 30 years, 20 years, conditions are going to take you in the opposite direction. You'll be chasing the ball at that point. The reason we brought it to you, right, was to say you can set a goal, set a roadmap, and head in that direction. And any time you set a longer-term goal like this, conditions are going to change, and you have to be reactive. But I think your staff has shown you can do it. You can do it under these circumstances and other circumstances. Very frankly, each time you don't choose to move in that direction, you most likely are going to make it harder to move in that direction later. And that's
Okay.
the only point.
That's well said, Dave. I think that what we have a little trouble definitionally here is that this is not a time to lock us into financial decisions when we don't know what those decisions will be based on. So there's a question of the assumptions, which all three of us have said we support, and then there's the matter of actually how do we get there. And as I've said before, for me, I've got to have a little more support from the finance staff in order for me even to make the next step. And if you want to say bring it back in a few weeks or whenever you're ready, I think we first have to define what are the specific points. But much of these spreadsheets is based on financial assumptions, not on technology assumptions. And that's where I don't have the information that I need today. And I don't know when you're going to have it to bring back to us.
You know, Chair Horton and members of the committee, I think part of the problem is what comes first, the chicken or the egg, and we've got a problem here with if the council really wants to set a goal of becoming carbon neutral, whether it's 2020 or 2030, you know, this is a possible way to get there. Clearly, there is a ton of uncertainty here, and quite honestly, that uncertainty is not going to go away in the next 6 months or a year. It's because many of them are well beyond our control, and I think let's just say that you recommended the council that they go forward with the goal, but you have concerns about the feasibility or something like that. And then what we would do is say, okay, then we'll come up with an implementation plan. And in my mind, we're probably talking it would have a short-term component. What are we going to do next year? And then what are our plans over the next 5 years? And then every year we would renew that, because the short-term stuff, especially the first 2 or 3 years, are things that probably we need to do anyway. But then it gets, as you get out there, and even when you get to plug-in hybrids, will the technology be there? The B50, that, you know, we'll be able to do that under warranty. And that's in that 5-year time frame. And then you get a little further out is that, you know, and I think, and there will be a cost to that. There will be a cost to that implementation plan, just like there's a much larger staff in solid waste now than there was 5 years ago when we set up the goal of a 70% diversion, because it takes people to implement that. And we'd have to then bring you funding sources to pay for, you know, Jim Dewey, quite honestly, he's done this. This is, you know, most of what he does is manage facilities for the city. So to have done this on top of that is just a tremendous job. But there will be a cost to that. I mean, but if, you know, we can come back and debate some of the assumptions here, but I think in most cases it's going to be, do you want to have this goal of being carbon neutral again, whether it's 2020, 2030? At this point, that's almost immaterial, because there are so many variables that will affect this over the next 5 to 10 years.
The problem, without being a little bit more specific than what you've just outlined for me, kind of goes back to the airport decision that we had. And I don't know that we're at the same place that we were in the airport discussion, where we knew there were some critical points where we had to have information, and then we would make a go. And I think you and I even talked about that offline. And I'm not to the point now where I even know what the critical decisions are, and I need help from finance in order to get me there. Now, I'm happy to work on that whenever they want to bring it back. But at that point, then I could say, based on the following 6, 8, 10 assumptions, whatever they are, we can move ahead. Now, if you want to make a philosophical goal to do this that is not tied to fiscal reality, that's a whole nother horse of a different color. And I didn't think that's what the Finance Committee was supposed to do. So what do you want us to do?
I have a suggestion. We take what Jim mentioned, that, and Jim, you're going to have to help me on the timeline of this, that we come back to council saying, if we want to pursue the goal of carbon neutrality by 2020, what's the short-term reality, 5-year outlook, and then what are the assumptions for the next, blocks of time? And I think that might answer at least the initial concerns of the financial realities we have doing some of the just do it's, but bringing that to us here before that would go to council. Have it one more go. But basically it's suggesting what you did, but have it come back here within a time period of a month.
Yeah, probably the 30 to 60 day time frame, just because everybody's working on budget, and it would probably be at kind of the macro level of here's
Well,
what
and I think we can't expect anything but a macro level because we're looking at assumptions going into the future and things are going to change. So I'll make a motion that within 30 to 60 days, this Finance Committee receives another presentation from staff that looks at the financial realities, short-term and longer-term, in terms of making a goal of being carbon neutral by 2020.
Is there a second for that one?
Well, yeah, you had me up until the end when you put in the date 2020, because
Well, the answer can be no when we come back at 20. But we're looking at a framework here, and if we want to extend it out to 2030, maybe I can add to the motion
for the analysis purposes.
for the analysis purpose. If you want to add it out, that's fine.
Okay, for the analysis purposes, because I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to get to that date, but
So that-
for
is that
the
the-
analysis purposes, I'll
Is that
second
the revised motion?
That's fine. with
Okay,
me.
we have a
Does that make
second.
sense?
Okay. Is there any further discussion on that? Then I'll call for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 Motion carries. Thank you. Any further items today?
No, that at least gives us a basis to come back to you and give you more informed information.
All right, then meeting adjourned.